This is being chaired by Senator Carl Levin, a Democrat of Michigan, and the chief witness you see there is the CIA Director, George Tenet. He is in the room. Also testifying will be the Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson, and who is the U.S. Navy Defense Intelligence Agency Director. We'll be bringing that to you live just as soon as they start. That's Senator Levin there, also many other senators there, and you see the CIA Director also. They'll be starting in just a few moments, and we'll wait for that start.
Good morning, everybody. The committee meets this morning to receive testimony from the Director of Central Intelligence and the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency on the threats to the United States interests. Director Tenet and Admiral Wilson, we welcome both of you back to our committee. First, I want to express my appreciation to both of you and to the thousands of dedicated professionals throughout the intelligence community for their contributions to the war on terrorism in the past months. Some have made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. 7 DIA employees were killed and 8 others were injured in the September 11 attack on the Pentagon. The first American killed in action in Afghanistan was Michael Spann, who was the 79th CIA officer to die in the line of duty. The grateful nation will forever honor their service and their sacrifice. Every member of this committee knows the critical importance of timely intelligence to the successes of Operation Enduring Freedom, and I know that the entire military chain of command, from the soldiers on the ground in Afghanistan to the highest levels of the National Command Authority, are grateful for the tremendous efforts of the men and women of your 2 agencies. Last November, Senator Warner and I had the opportunity to meet with some of the dedicated intelligence professionals in the Afghanistan theater of operations, and we saw firsthand the critical contributions that they are making to Operation Enduring Freedom. In our letter of invitation to this hearing, Senator Warner and I asked our witnesses for their evaluation of the non-traditional threats to our interests both at home and abroad, which of course includes the terrorist threat as well as the new missions that the intelligence community is conducting or must be prepared to conduct to meet these threats. We are interested in learning the details of your agency's support to Operation Enduring Freedom and the extent to which this operation revealed any deficiencies in our ability to collect, analyze, and disseminate intelligence to warfighters and policymakers. We're interested in the intelligence community's assessment of the extent to which Operation Enduring Freedom has disrupted the ability of the al-Qaida network to conduct operations against U.S. interests both here at home and throughout the world. We also want to get an assessment from both of our witnesses this morning of the current military capability of the Iraqi regime, including its efforts to acquire weapons of mass destruction, the threat that Iraq poses to its neighbors, and what steps would be necessary to remove Saddam Hussein from power. Finally, we're interested in hearing what countries are exporting technologies that could help create weapons of mass destruction or the means to deliver them. Those are some of the questions which we'll be addressing, and I hope that our two witnesses would also address. I thought it was important that we begin this hearing in open session. Both Director Tenet and Admiral Wilson submitted their prepared statements for this hearing to the committee last week. Their statements will be made part of the record. I've asked our witnesses to limit their opening remarks to 5 to 7 minutes so that we can get right to questions. And after, excuse me, after one 6-minute round of questions in open session, we will go directly into closed session in room 219 next door. Senator Warner suggested that we proceed now to your opening statements, and what we'll do is we will call on Senator Warner later for his opening statement, but let me now call upon you, Director Tenet. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll try and stay within the 5 or 6 minutes that you asked for. We'll go right to terrorism and work through this as quickly as we can. Mr. Chairman, last year when we appeared in open session, we told the committee that bin Laden and the al-Qaida network were the most immediate and serious threat that the country faced. This remains true today despite an enormous amount of progress we have made in Afghanistan and in disrupting the network elsewhere in the world. We assess that al-Qaida and other terrorist groups will continue to plan to attack this country and its interests abroad. Their modus operandi is to have multiple attacks in the works simultaneously and to have al-Qaida cells in place to conduct them. We know that terrorists have considered attacks in the United States against high-profile government or private facilities, famous landmarks, and U.S. infrastructure nodes such as airports, bridges, harbors, dams, and financial centers. American diplomatic and military installations are at high risk, especially in East Africa, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Operations against U.S. target could be launched by al-Qaida cells already in place in major European cities and the Middle East. Al-Qaida can also exploit its presence or connections to other groups in such countries as Somalia, Yemen, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Although the September 11th attack suggests that al-Qaida and other terrorist groups will continue to use conventional weapons, one of our highest concerns is their stated readiness to attempt unconventional attacks against us. Terrorist groups worldwide have ready access to information on chemical, biological, and even nuclear weapons through open sources. Documents recovered from al-Qaida facilities in Afghanistan show that bin Laden was pursuing a sophisticated biological weapons research program. We also believe that bin Laden was seeking to acquire or develop a nuclear device. Al-Qaida may be pursuing a radioactive dispersal device, what some call a dirty bomb. Alternatively, Al-Qaida or other terrorist groups might try to launch conventional attacks against the chemical or nuclear industrial infrastructure of the United States, to cause widespread toxic or radiological damage. We are alert to the possibility of cyber warfare attack. September 11th demonstrated our dependence on critical infrastructure systems that rely on electronic and computer networks. Attacks of this nature will become increasingly a viable option for terrorists as they and foreign adversaries become familiar with these targets and the technologies required to attack them. We are also watching, Mr. Chairman, states like Iran and Iraq that continue to support terrorist groups. Iran continues to provide support, including arms transfers, to Palestinian rejection groups and Hezbollah. Tehran also failed to move decisively against al-Qaeda members who have relocated to Iran from Afghanistan. Iraq has a long history of supporting terrorists, including giving sanctuary to Abu Nidal. Mr. Chairman, while al-Qaeda represents a broad-based Sunni worldwide extremist network, it would be a mistake to dismiss possible connections to either other groups or state sponsors, either Sunni or Shia. There is a convergence of common interest in hurting the United States and its allies, an interest that make traditional thinking in this regard unacceptable. The war on terrorism, Mr. Chairman, to answer one of your first questions, has dealt severe blows to al-Qaeda and its leadership. The group is no longer able to run large-scale training and recruitment programs in Afghanistan. Drawing both on our own assets, the military's action, and increased cooperation from allies around the world, we are uncovering terrorist plans and breaking up their cells around the world. These efforts have yielded the arrest of over 1,300 extremists believed to be associated with al-Qaeda operatives in over 70 countries and have disrupted terrorist operations and potential terrorist attacks. Mr. Chairman, bin Laden did not believe we would invade his sanctuary. He saw the United States as soft, impatient, and unprepared for a fearful, long, bloody war of attrition. He did not count on the fact that we had lined up allies that could help us overcome barriers of terrain and culture. He did not know about the collection and operational initiatives that would allow us to strike with great accuracy at the heart of the Taliban and al-Qaeda. He underestimated our capabilities, our readiness, and our resolve. That said, Mr. Chairman, I must repeat that al-Qaeda has not been destroyed. It and other like-minded groups remain willing and able to strike us. Al-Qaeda leaders still at large are working to reconstitute organization and resume terrorist operations. We must eradicate these organizations by denying them their source of financing, their sanctuary, and eliminating their ability to hijack charitable organizations for terrorist purposes. We must be prepared for a long war, and we must not falter. Mr. Chairman, we have to also look beyond the immediate danger of terrorist attacks to the conditions that allow terrorism to take root around the world. These conditions are no less threatening to U.S. national security than terrorism itself. The problems that terrorists exploit, poverty, alienation, and ethnic tensions will grow more acute over the next decade. This will especially be true in those parts of the world that have served as the most fertile recruiting grounds for Islamic extremists. More importantly, demographic trends tell us that the world's poorest and politically most unstable regions, which include parts of the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa, will have the largest youth populations in the world over the next 2 decades and beyond. Most of these countries will lack the economic institutions or resources to effectively integrate these youth into their societies. Our campaign in Afghanistan, Mr. Chairman, has made great progress, but there are challenges ahead. The Afghan people, with international assistance, are working to overcome a traditionally weak central government, a devastated infrastructure, a grave humanitarian crisis, and ethnic divisions that have deepened over the last 20 years. Interim Authority Chief Karzai will have to play a delicate balancing game domestically. Ongoing power struggles among Pashtun leaders there underscore the volatility of tribal and personal relationships that he must successfully navigate. Mr. Chairman, a word about Pakistan. The Musharraf government's alignment with the United States and its abandonment of nearly a decade of support for the Taliban represents a fundamental political shift with inherent political risks because of the militant Islamic and anti-American sentiments that exist within Pakistan. President Musharraf's intention to establish a moderate, tolerant Islamic state as outlined in his landmark 12 January speech, is being welcomed by most Pakistanis, but he will still have to confront major vested interests. The speech has energized debate across the Muslim world about the vision of Islam, which vision of Islam is the right one for the future of the Islamic community. Incidents like the tragic murder of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl and the tragic events this weekend highlight, however, the challenges that Musharraf faces in his efforts to crack down on Islamic extremists. With regard to India and Pakistan, Mr. Chairman, we have been very concerned subsequent to the attack on the Indian Parliament in December of the instability that has been created. The chance of war between these two nuclear-armed states is higher than at any point since 1971. If India were to conduct large-scale offensive operations into Pakistani Kashmir, Pakistan might retaliate with strikes of its own in the belief that its nuclear deterrent would limit the scope of an Indian counterattack. Both India and Pakistan are publicly downplaying the risks of nuclear conflict in the current crisis. We are deeply concerned, however, that a conventional war, once begun, could escalate into nuclear confrontation. With regard to Iraq, Mr. Chairman, a number of points. Saddam has craftily responded to our progress in Afghanistan with a political and diplomatic charm offensive. He's carefully cultivating neighboring states, drawing them into economically dependent relationships in the hopes of further undermining their support for sanctions. The profits he gains from these relationships provide him the means to reward key supporters and, more importantly, to fund his pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. His calculus is never about bettering or helping the Iraqi people. I want to be clear about this. Saddam remains a threat. He is determined to thwart UN sanctions, press ahead with weapons of mass destruction, and resurrect the military force he had before the Gulf War. Today, he maintains his vise grip on the levers of power through a pervasive intelligence and security apparatus, and even his reduced military force, which is less than half of its pre-war size, remains capable of defeating more poorly armed internal opposition groups and threatening Iraq's neighbors. We continue to watch Iraq's involvement in terrorist activities. Baghdad has a long history of supporting terrorism, altering its targets to reflect changing priorities and goals. It has also had contacts with al-Qaida. Their ties may be limited by divergent ideologies, but the two sides' mutual antipathy toward the United States and the Saudi royal family suggests that tactical cooperation between them is possible, even though Saddam is well aware that such activity would carry serious consequences. If we can just go to Iran for a moment, Mr. Chairman, because I think it's very important to talk about the Iranian political situation. For almost 5 years, President Khatami and his reformist supporters have been stymied by Supreme Leader Khamenei and their hardliners. We're concerned that the reform movement could be losing its momentum. The hardliners have systematically used the unelected institutions they control, the security forces, the judiciary, and the Guardians Council to block reforms that challenged their entrenched interests. They have closed newspapers, forced members of Khatami's cabinet from office, and arrested those who have dared to speak out against their tactics. Frustrations are growing as the populace sees elected institutions such as the Majlis and the presidency unable to break the hardliners' hold on power. The hardline regime appears secure for now because the security forces have easily contained dissenters and arrested potential opposition leaders. No one has emerged to rally reformers into a forceful movement for change, and the Iranian public appears to prefer gradual reform to another revolution. But the equilibrium is very fragile. For all of this, reform is not dead. We must remember that the people of Iran have demonstrated in 4 national elections since 1997 that they want change and have grown disillusioned with the promises of the revolution. Social, intellectual, and political developments are proceeding, civil institutions are growing, and new newspapers open as soon as others are closed. The initial signs of Tehran's cooperation and common cause with us in Afghanistan are being eclipsed by Iranian efforts to undermine U.S. influence there. We have seen little sign of a reduction in Iran's support for terrorism in the past year. Mr. Chairman, moving on to proliferation, three categories that obviously concern us: chemical, biological, and nuclear and ballistic missile systems. The CBW threat continues to grow for a variety of reasons and to present us with very important monitoring challenges. The dual-use nature of many CBW agents complicates our assessment of offensive programs. Many production facilities are hidden in plants that are virtually indistinguishable from commercial facilities. On the nuclear side, we are concerned about the possibility of significant nuclear technology transfers going on undetected. On the missile side, the proliferation of ICBM and cruise missile designs and technology has raised the threat to the United States from weapons of mass destruction delivery systems to a critical threshold. As outlined in our recent national intelligence estimate on the subject, most of the intelligence community agencies project that by 2015, the U.S. most likely will face ICBM threats from North Korea and Iran and possibly Iraq. This is in addition to the long-standing missile forces of Russia and China. Short and medium-range ballistic missiles pose a significant threat right now. Russian entities continue to provide other countries with technology and expertise applicable to CW, BW, nuclear and ballistic missile and cruise missile projects. Russia appears to be the first choice of proliferant states seeking the most advanced technology and training. These sales are a major source of funds for Russian commercial and defense industries and military research and development. Russia continues to supply significant assistance on nearly all aspects of Tehran's nuclear fuel cycle. It is also providing Iran assistance on long-range ballistic missile programs. Chinese firms remain key suppliers of missile-related technologies to Pakistan, Iran, and several other countries. This is in spite of Beijing's November 2000 missile pledge not to assist in any way countries seeking to develop nuclear-capable ballistic missiles. Most of China's efforts involve solid propellant ballistic missile development for countries that are largely dependent on Chinese expertise and materials, but it has also sold cruise missiles to countries of concern such as Iran. We're closely watching Beijing's compliance with its bilateral commitment in 1996 not to assist unsafeguarded nuclear facilities and its pledge in 1997 not to provide any new nuclear cooperation to Iran. North Korea continues to export complete ballistic missiles and production capabilities along with related raw materials, components, and expertise. Iraq continues to build and expand an infrastructure capable of producing WMD. Baghdad is expanding its civilian chemical industries in ways that could be diverted quickly into CW production. We believe it also maintains an active and capable BW program. Iraq told UNSCOM it had worked with several BW agents. We believe that Baghdad continues to pursue ballistic missile capabilities that exceed the restrictions imposed by UN resolutions. We believe that Saddam never abandoned his nuclear weapons program. Iraq maintains a significant number of nuclear scientists, program documentation, and probably some dual-use manufacturing infrastructure that could support a reinvigorated nuclear program. Baghdad's access to foreign expertise could support a rejuvenated program, but our major near-term concern is the possibility that Saddam might gain access to fissile material. Mr. Chairman, the other issue I want to raise is our unique spaceborne advantage and our satellite advantage. This advantage that we've enjoyed over the past few decades is eroding as more countries, including China and India, field increasingly sophisticated reconnaissance satellites. Today, there are 3 commercial satellites collecting high-resolution imagery, much of it openly marketed. With regard to Russia, Mr. Chairman, the most striking development over the past year has been Moscow's greater engagement with the United States. Even before September 11th, President Putin had moved to engage the United States as part of a broader effort to integrate Russia more fully into the West, modernize its economy, and regain international status and influence. During his second year in office, Putin has moved strongly to advance his policy agenda. He pushed the Duma to pass key economic legislation on budget reform, legitimizing urban property sales, flattening and simplifying tax rates, and reducing red tape for small business. He reinvigorated military reform by placing his top lieutenant atop the defense ministry and increasing military spending for the second straight year, even as he forced tough decisions on de-emphasizing strategic forces and pushing for a leaner, better-equipped conventional military force. Putin is trying to build a strong presidency that can ensure these reforms are implemented across Russia, while managing a fragmented bureaucracy beset by informal networks that serve private interests. In his quest to build a strong state, however, he is trying to establish parameters in which political forces must operate. This managed democracy is illustrated by his continuing moves against independent national television companies. On the economic front, Putin will have to take on banking and judicial reform to move the country closer to a Western-style market economy. He has made no headway on Chechnya. The war, meanwhile, threatens to spill over into neighboring Georgia. After the 11th of September, he emphatically joined to join us in the fight against terrorism. So far, Putin's outreach to the United States has incurred little political damage. The depth of support within key elites, however, notwithstanding popular support, is unclear, particularly within the military and security services. Public comments by some senior military officers indicate that elements of the military doubt that the international situation has changed sufficiently to overcome deeply rooted suspicions of the United States. I want to turn next to China. Mr. Chairman, last year I told you that China's drive to become a great power was coming sharply into focus. The challenge, I said, was that Beijing saw the United States as the primary obstacle to the realization of that goal. Certainly a lot has changed. September 11th changed the context of China's approach to us, but did not change the fundamentals. China is developing an increasingly competitive economy and building a modern military force with the ultimate objective of asserting itself as a great power in East Asia. It fears that we are gaining regional influence at China's expense, and it views our encouragement of a Japanese military role in counterterrorism as a support for Japanese rearmament. As always, Beijing's approach to the United States must be viewed against the backdrop of Chinese domestic politics. I told you last year that the approach of a major leadership transition in China's accession to the WTO would soon be coloring all of Beijing's actions. Both of those benchmarks are now upon us. The 16th Party Congress will be held this fall, and China is now confronting the obligations of WTO membership. Its entry into WTO underscores the trepidation the succession contenders will have about maintaining internal stability. WTO membership is a major challenge to Chinese stability because the economic requirements of accession will upset already disaffected sectors of the population and increase unemployment. Mr. Chairman, the Taiwan issue remains central. Cross-strait relations remain at a stalemate, but there are competing trend lines beyond that. Chinese leaders seemed somewhat complacent last year that the growing economic integration across the Taiwan Strait was boosting Beijing's long-term leverage. The results of Taiwan's legislative elections in December, however, strengthened President Chen's hand domestically. Although Beijing has since invited members of Chen's party to visit the mainland, Chinese leaders might resume a more confrontational stance if it suspects him of using his electoral mandate to move toward independence. Taiwan also remains the focus of China's military modernization programs. Earlier this month, Beijing announced a 17.6% increase in defense spending. If this trend continues, China could double its announced defense spending between 2000 and 2005. Over the past year, Beijing's military training exercises have taken on an increasingly real-world focus, emphasizing rigorous practice and operational capabilities and improving the military's actual ability to use force. This is aimed not only at Taiwan, but also at increasing the risk to the United States itself in any future Taiwan contingency. China continues to upgrade and expand the conventional short-range ballistic missile force it has arrayed against Taiwan. It also continues to make progress towards fielding its first generation of road-mobile strategic missiles, the DF-31. Finally, Mr. Chairman, a word about North Korea. North Korea's large standing army continues to be a priority claimant on scarce resources. We have seen no evidence that Pyongyang has abandoned its goal of eventual reunification of the peninsula under the North's control. The cumulative effects of prolonged economic mismanagement have left the country increasingly susceptible to the possibility of state failure. North Korea faces deepening economic deprivation and the return of famine in the absence of fundamental economic reforms and large-scale international humanitarian assistance. It has ignored international efforts to address systemic agricultural problems that exacerbate North Korea's chronic food shortages. Large numbers of North Koreans face long-term health damage as a result of the prolonged malnutrition and the collapse of the public health network. Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there. There's a lot more in the statement, but I think I've exceeded my 5 or 6 minutes. Thank you, sir.
You've done very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Tenet. Admiral Wilson.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking you for your gracious comments about the DIA employees who were lost in the Pentagon. And also, I should thank Senator Warner for reading their names and stories into the congressional record at the time of their memorial service. We appreciate it. I also point out that 8 members of Naval Intelligence who are members of the General Defense Intelligence Program Federation also lost their lives in that attack. What I'd like to do to supplement the DCI's country-by-country comments is restrict myself to a few preliminary observations about how the events of September 11th and their aftermath are affecting the emerging global security environment and our intelligence or threat paradigm. For several years, I and others have been talking about the asymmetric threat to the homeland, and on September 11th, that theory became reality. A strategic attack was carried out not by the military forces of a rival state, but by a shadowy global network of extremists and terrorists who struck unprotected targets using methods we did not anticipate. The attackers turned 2 of our strengths, a free, tolerant, and open society, and the world's best air transportation system, into deadly vulnerabilities. Their attack had human, economic, and psychological impacts of deep proportions. The terrorists were not deterred by our overwhelming military superiority. In fact, for that day at least, they made it irrelevant. In the wake of that attack, traditional concepts of strategic threat, security, deterrence, warning, and military superiority don't completely apply. Perhaps the most critical dynamic following the terrorist attacks is how the rest of the world now perceives the United States. On one hand, September 11th exposed our vulnerabilities and demonstrated the strategic potential of a well-executed asymmetric attack. Facts that are extremely appealing to our foes. But rather than demoralizing us, the attack generated intense patriotism and resolve at home, sympathy and support abroad, and a greater willingness among the major powers to accept or accede to U.S. leadership, at least temporarily. And the speed and efficiency with which we projected power to an austere theater of operations, deposed the Taliban, and continue to attack the al-Qaida network are leaving a lasting impression. Over the longer term, the outcome of the war on terrorism will be decisive in determining international perceptions of the United States. Success will strengthen our role and leverage and accentuate positive trends. Failure would invite a host of challenges. In many respects, the post-Cold War period ended on September 11th. The next decade or so may well be defined by the struggle over globalization. Values and concepts long championed by the United States and the West, political and economic openness, democracy, and individual rights, market economics, international trade, scientific rationalism, and the rule of law are being carried forward on the tide of globalization. Money, people, information, technology, ideas, goods, and services moving around the globe at higher speeds and with fewer restrictions. Our adversaries increasingly understand this link. They equate globalization to Americanization and see the United States as the principal architect and primary beneficiary of an emerging order that undermines their values, interests, beliefs, and culture. They blame the United States for what's wrong in the world and seek allies among states, groups, and individuals who worry about U.S. hegemony and are unhappy with the present or perceived future. They are adept at using globalization against us, exploiting the freer flow of money, people, and technology, attacking the vulnerabilities presented by political and economic openness, and using globalization's downsides to foster an extremist message and attract recruits and support from among globalization's losers. In this context, the September terrorist attacks were the first strategic strikes in a war against our vision of the future world order. They targeted our homeland, but also struck a blow against global openness, the global transportation network, and the global economy. These extremists and their allies understand that their desired world cannot coexist with our brand of civilization. Encouraging, furthering, and consolidating the positive aspects of globalization while reducing and managing its downsides and defeating its enemies may well be the civilized world's measure of merit for the next decade. Finally, even before September 11th, I expected the coming decade to be at least as turbulent as the 1990s, because the basic factors driving global change are still largely at play. Since then, my expectation of uncertainty has only heightened. The global economic outlook is worse. There are likely to be more people in need. Global defense and security issues are murkier. The Muslim world is under increased pressure, and key strategic relationships between the United States, Russia, China, India, and Pakistan, for instance, are more in flux. At the same time, long-standing regional disputes, especially in the Middle East and South Asia, have taken on added global importance. In light of the above, I have accelerated my consideration of a new threat paradigm designed to capture the full range of challenges likely to confront our nation during the next decade or so. This emerging framework rests on several basic ideas: the likelihood of prolonged global uncertainty, thoughts about how others are reacting to their perception of U.S. dominance, the notion of dangerous conditions arising from the convergence of negative global trends, the strategic importance of the asymmetric threat, and one element that hasn't changed since September 11th, the continuing military threat posed by the strategic and regional forces of other nations. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to leave you with the understanding that we are working diligently to improve our capacity to handle all of these intelligence challenges. But the path is not an easy one. The complex nature of the global environment and the characteristics of many emerging threats, extremist, global, non-state, networked, adaptive, make them less vulnerable to traditional means. Ultimately, we must improve our capacity to deal with these asymmetric adversaries, even as we expand our understanding of more traditional military threats and enhance our ability to support military operations on the conventional battlefield. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate yours and the committee's continued support in ensuring that our intelligence capabilities remain the best in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Wilson. Let me call on Senator Warner for his opening comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very quickly, I'll put my statement in the record, but Mr. Tenet, we welcome you. Speaking for this senator, I have a high degree of confidence, as I've always had, in your professional abilities. I think you're doing an exemplary job in your position. Sir. You and I have worked together for many, many years, since I was vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and you were on that committee as the staff director at that time. And Admiral, I've known you for many years, one sailor to another. As you bring your career to a close, this may well be your final appearance before this committee. I commend you. You've served your nation well, and I hope you and your family can look forward to many more productive years, hopefully in service of the country in some way.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warner. First, Mr. Tenet, let me ask you about the agreed framework between ourselves and North Korea. The main requirement of this agreed framework is that the North Koreans maintain a freeze on their nuclear program, and that includes shutting their reactor, halting construction of new reactors, sealing the reprocessing plant, canning spent fuel, and allowing IAEA inspectors to monitor their nuclear sites. In your judgment, is North Korea maintaining the freeze on its nuclear program?
Yes, sir. it's complying with that specific agreement with regard to that specific facility.
Now, on the question of missile and weapon of mass destruction exports, you've given us your assessment of what a number of countries have been doing. When I look at China's record, I see that they are currently exporting missile technology to Iran, ballistic missile technology to Libya, and as a matter of fact, also exporting ballistic missile technology to North Korea itself. The President has said that every nation is a decision to make, whether they are with us or with the terrorists. Where's China?
Sir, I think that we have a deep concern that the Chinese are engaging in activities that continue to be inimical not just to our interests, but that their activities stimulate secondary proliferation activities that only complicate the threat that we face, our forces face, and our allies face, particularly in the Middle East and other places where they have these relationships. I know that this is an intense focus on the part of the administration in terms of policy discussions. And we have, in some instances, we know that Chinese firms operate on their own. In some instances, activities are condoned by the government. But I would say that what you see is, and when you focus, it's important to focus on the totality of what's going on. It's the combination of the Russian assistance, the Chinese assistance, the North Korean assistance that allows people to mix and match, create an indigenous capability that then threatens us, that becomes available for secondary proliferation. So the line has to be drawn hard. We have to look at the regimes that are currently in place. Countries conveniently get underneath regimes. They may not sell total ballistic missiles. They will sell components and get underneath the specific lines. But we're at a point when you couple the convergence between terrorist activities and these proliferation activities that result either in ballistic missile proliferation or the proliferation of these technologies to terrorist groups, the convergence of these two threats pose a strategic threat to the United States that is not getting smaller.
Does that lead you to the conclusion that China is either with us or against us in the war on terrorism?
The Chinese, sir, have actually attempted to be very cooperative in this regard.
But they're still exporting missile technology to Iran, to Libya, and to North Korea?
Sir, you can't have it both ways. And the bottom line has to be that behavior in one arena has to be matched by behavior in another arena.
Therefore,
it's a mixed bag, and they're not.
Now, on oil that is coming from Iraq into Jordan and Turkey, apparently truckloads of Iraqi oil outside of the UN-administered oil for food program is getting into Turkey and Jordan every day. Have we asked them to stop?
Yes, sir. I believe that on the policy side we have talked to them about this. Obviously, the Jordanians are great friends of ours, and work so many accounts for us, and that dependency needs to be shut off. So we have to be, it's more complicated in this instance because of our concern that the king have all the resources at his disposal to help us in so many other ways. But if we could offset that Iraqi oil by other suppliers providing the Jordanians, we could end a problem very quickly.
And relative to Iraq, a couple other questions. Do you have any evidence that Saddam Hussein or his agents played a role in the September 11th terrorist attacks, or that he has links to al-Qaida?
Well, as I note in my statement, there's no doubt that there have been contacts and linkages to the al-Qaida organization. As to where we are on September 11th, the jury's out. And as I said carefully in my statement, it would be a mistake to dismiss the possibility of state sponsorship, whether Iranian or Iraqi, and we'll see where the evidence takes us. But I want you to think about al-Qaida as a front company that mixes and matches its capabilities. The distinctions between Sunni and Shia that have traditionally divided terrorist groups are not distinctions you should make anymore, because there is a common interest against the United States and its allies in this region, and they will seek capability wherever they can get it.
Relative to the question that I asked you to address on how do we change that regime in Iraq, what is your view as to whether the Iraqi National Congress, the Shias, the Kurds, or other Iraqi opposition groups could perform a similar role to that played by the Northern Alliance and other opposition groups in Afghanistan?
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to talk to you about this in closed session.
Thank you. On the question of non-missile delivery means of weapons of mass destruction, there was a unclassified summary which was issued in December of 2001, giving a national intelligence estimate on foreign ballistic missile developments. And I just want to quote from it. It's quite a long quote, but it's addressing an important subject. The intelligence community judges that U.S. territory is more likely to be attacked with weapons of mass destruction using non-missile means. This is page 18 of that report. Primarily because such means are less expensive than developing and producing ICBMs, can be covertly developed and deployed. The source of the weapon could be masked in an attempt to evade retaliation. Probably would be more reliable than ICBMs that have not completed rigorous testing and validation programs. Probably would be much more accurate than emerging ICBMs over the next 15 years. Probably would be more effective for disseminating biological warfare agent than a ballistic missile, and would avoid missile defenses. Is that still the view of the intelligence community?
Yes, sir, so long as we put the front paragraph and the last paragraph in this, it says the probability that a missile with a weapon of mass destruction will be used against the United States or forces or interest is higher today than during most of the Cold War and will continue to grow as capabilities of potential adversaries mature. And then the bottom sentence after what you read says, nevertheless, the missile threat will continue to grow in part because missiles become more important regional weapons in the arsenals of numerous countries. Moreover, missiles provide a level of prestige, coercive diplomacy, and deterrence that non-missiles do not. So we've got two different phenomena here, and we stand by both those judgments.
With those sentences, of course, in the estimate, you still stand by the statement that it is more likely that the attack would come from non-missile means for the reasons you give?
In the near term, sir, but neither scenario of the use of missiles or terrorism is a no likelihood situation for our country, and we have to plan and deter against both.
Thank you. Senator Warner.
And following up on that last comment, plan and deter, we know that it requires a very long time to prepare these missile defenses. And we cannot start at the point in time when the scales might tilt towards missile being the greater threat than what exists today. I just make that observation. You agree with that?
Well, sir, we don't make the policy, but the question is, whatever you choose to do, you have to figure out how long you want to take risk before you do something about something, and the rest is really a policy question that you all have to determine.
I'd like to return to the question of Iraq. I fully appreciate the need to explore much of this behind closed doors, but the fact of the matter is that every day we pick up the paper, we read that consideration is being given, or speculation in the papers, television and otherwise, and I think I'm not criticizing the media, it's out there, that our president, I think quite properly, is concentrating a lot of thought on taking out Saddam Hussein militarily, if all other avenues diplomatically in the end fail. And I admire him for that, because he does pose a danger not only to this nation, but much of the free world. Now, I think we have an obligation to talk about what are the consequences if, in fact, we're faced with that decision and have to carry through, hopefully with a coalition of other nations. But if we have to go it alone, then we have to go it alone. And here are my concerns. I think militarily that men and women of our armed forces, again, hopefully with a coalition, can take him out, and expeditiously. There will be casualties, and I think significant casualties. And we as a nation have got to be prepared to stand behind the men and women of the armed forces and our commander-in-chief as that operation is executed and completed. Then the question, which I think Senator Levin posed, and if you wish to wait, Who fills the vacuum? Are there persons that exist that can step in, gain the confidence of the Iraqi people, and lead that nation, hopefully in a direction that's more compatible with a degree of democracy and freedom in that part of the world? We will also have to evaluate, and this is my question to you, in the aftermath, what is the likely degree of increase in the threats to this nation by means of terrorism? We now know painfully that a dozen or so individuals brought about this horrific damage to our nation on September the 11th. They could fracture now in groups of 1 and 2 and come into this nation. We saw in the aftermath of the Gulf War, we won a brilliant military campaign together with a coalition, but we lost the public relation battle over time. At the expense of his own people, Saddam Hussein really won over significant numbers of the hearts and the minds, particularly in the Muslim community. We're seeing that now as our Vice President evaluates the views in his trip. We saw it in polling data. Now, you and I and others understand that that polling data reflects the tight control over the people in those various nations of the world as a consequence of their own governments and the manner in which the media is controlled, but nevertheless exists. My concern is in the aftermath of this, and we'll probably discover a significant infrastructure for weapons of mass destruction and research and development, indeed probably manufacture and storage of these weapons. But what is the degree, how do we go about evaluating the degree of the increase of terrorist attack, particularly by individuals who are ready to give up their lives willingly to bring further damage on our nation? Will not that invasion of a sovereign nation, the transformation of that government by force, spawn an increase in the number of individuals, not necessarily from Iraq, but from around the world, who will come and be inspired to inflict greater damage on this nation?
Senator, I'd say it's very hard to speculate in that regard. I think that on the one hand, you have a brutal regime in place that has done nothing for its people. I mean, that's clearly the fact. People have been repressed and brutalized for many years while a small coterie of individuals maintain power at their expense. So I would not make the one-for-one correlation. I think the terrorist phenomenon is something that is big right now and something hopefully that will continue to basically dismantle and disrupt its ability to operate. I think that one of the messages that the President and the Secretary of State have talked about is the importance of letting the Islamic world know that Islam is not the enemy. So our statements and thought about how we talk about the war on terrorism is as important as the actions we take in giving people a sense that it's not about the large Muslim world, many of whom do not condone. The Quran does not condone the kinds of activities that have been undertaken.
Well, that's all very well and good, Mr. Director, but I must tell you that I think it's important that we begin to spend a lot of time on this subject and try as best we can to inform the American people and others of the consequences of a significant military action to take out Saddam Hussein. Now, what about the other governments in the Muslim world? They are very fragile, and some of these leaders are saying that type of operation could, in fact, bring down the government in my nation. Is that a potential?
Well, Senator, let me say that I'd like to hear from the Vice President when he gets back, because he's had these kinds of conversations. You often get a public face and a private face on these discussions.
Well,
and sometimes
you and I know that. We've all traveled and talked to those folks. I guess I'm not going to make much progress this morning, but I'm spending a lot of my time on this issue, and I feel an obligation. I hope our President consults with the Congress. That representation has been made by a series of individuals to this committee. But it is a major, major decision that we've got to prepare the American people for what the consequences would be. Yes, we would destroy weapons of mass destruction, the ability of that nation to produce it. But in the wake, would we spawn a higher, much higher degree of terrorism? Now, the question is, at what point do we exhaust diplomatic efforts and then take on this operation? If, in fact, this potential by Iraq to manufacture these weapons could result in tremendous damage to our nation or other parts of the world in the meantime. I just wanted to, as best I could, engage that colloquy with you at this point in time. And my time is up.
Thank you so much, Senator Warner. Senator Lieberman.
Excuse me. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Tenet and Admiral Wilson, for being here and for your excellent testimony. I want to get to Iraq in a minute, but I do want to, Mr. Tenet, draw attention to something you said in your testimony about al-Qaida, and it echoes what the President and others have said, and I sometimes wonder whether people are listening enough, which is, though we have achieved an extraordinary victory in Afghanistan and defeated the Taliban, liberated Afghanistan, it's my impression that both the Taliban and al-Qaida forces are still there. They're not in control, but we have not eliminated the Taliban and al-Qaida presence from even Afghanistan. Is that correct?
Sir, that's true. I would say that we're still not done in Afghanistan, that Operation Anaconda was enormously successful in taking and dealing with a large presence of organized fighters who simply would not flee or run away.
Right.
But that particularly in the eastern provinces up along the Pakistani border, there are still pockets of al-Qaida and Taliban that we still have to get after. So it's not done. And you're entering into another phase here that actually is more difficult, because you're probably looking at smaller units who intend to really operate against you in a classic insurgency format.
Yeah.
So I would caution that we still have much work to do here, although the trend is certainly enormously positive in terms of denying this country as a sanctuary
Absolutely.
of unfettered activity.
Yeah, exactly, and I thank you for that. Is it not likely that al-Qaeda forces are also not only in the mountains but interspersed in some of the urban areas as well?
Less likely, sir, because of our presence, but I think in these provinces and the mountainous areas where they've learned how to hide and operate, and as certainly as spring emerges, may see some more activity on their part, but I think the net situation is a lot better than it was, but we still have a long-term issue here. Admiral?
Okay, I'd like to give you a military perspective
Yes.
on this, is that the most important thing we've done is eliminated their national training center for al-Qaida to the export worldwide terrorists who are trained. What you see now is enormous progress being made against al-Qaida and the Taliban, but a very widespread probability of insurgency-type warfare or operations that may bridge the difference between terrorism and, insurgent warfare. And that's what the military has to be prepared for in the urban areas, in the rural areas, anywhere that they're operating in Afghanistan, and what they are preparing for.
That's very important. I think it's very important that we acknowledge that, understand it, and that the American people do as well. And I know when they do, they'll stick with us as we continue the battle.
So just one more point, Senator, if I might, and that is, Afghan is one theater and the rest of the world is another theater, and we have done an enormous amount of work to disrupt that worldwide network,
Right.
complicate planning, complicate command and control, and there's an enormous amount of progress that's been made. The key thing here is to deny other places, deny al-Qaida the sanctuary of operating with impunity any other place in the world. And there's been a lot of progress in that regard as well.
I appreciate that. Let me go to Iraq. Mr. Tenet, you know that I have a point of view here, and I've felt for a long time that as long as Saddam Hussein is in power in Baghdad, that represents a danger to the United States of America, to our allies, to our values. I think this statement that you've made here this morning on Iraq is very important. And to me, it's the strongest statement that I've heard you make directly. I don't mean that you may not have made similar statements at other times elsewhere, but I would commend it to all of all of my colleagues in the Senate and the House for reading as we go forward in this debate about next steps with regard to Saddam Hussein's regime. And frankly, I'd commend it to our allies around the world because you've laid out a very strong case here. Iraq has, I'm reading for your testimony, long history of supporting terrorists, including giving sanctuary to Abu Nidal. While al-Qaida represents a broad-based Sunni worldwide extremist network, it would be a mistake to dismiss possible connections to either other groups or state sponsors, either Sunni or Shia, and there I hear that as Iraq or Iran in this case. Let me be clear, you say. Saddam remains a threat. He's determined to thwart UN sanctions, press ahead with weapons of mass destruction, and resurrect the military force he had before the Gulf War. I continue to quote, Baghdad has a long history of supporting terrorism, altering its targets to reflect changing priorities and goals. It has also had contacts with al-Qaida. And then page 13 of your testimony, you go to the Iraqis' program of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles. I think we've acknowledged, everyone has, that he's got chemical and biological capacity. In fact, has used some of it against the Iranians and Iraqis. I think your statement about his nuclear weapons program is significant and unsettling, and we really ought to focus on it. We believe Saddam never abandoned his nuclear weapons program. Iraq retains a significant number of nuclear scientists, program documentation, probably some dual-use manufacturing infrastructure that could support a reinvigorated nuclear weapons program. Baghdad's access to foreign expertise could support a rejuvenated program. But our major near-term concern is the possibility that Saddam might gain access to fissile material. I thank you for those statements. I guess I'd just ask you one brief question, which is, where do you think Saddam might turn to gain access to fissile material? And how likely is it, do you think, that he might obtain it?
Sir, can we talk about that in closed session, please?
Certainly could.
Thank you.
Thank you. My time's up.
Thank you, Senator Lieberman. Senator Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask an Iraq question later in closed session, and then a worry of mine in regards to the threat of terrorism in our own hemisphere, more especially the activity of the rebel forces in Central and South America and the activity of organized crime and the drug trade, and does that represent a significant threat to the United States? I think without question why Director Tenet would say yes, but I'll say that until the closed session. And I want to thank Director Tenet, and I want to especially thank Admiral Wilson for persevering in their commands, more especially in bringing to our attention that of the public that it's a pretty dangerous world, especially for those in their command who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. My question is in reference to an overriding principle, it seems to me, of what we stand for within our military that is synonymous with our American values. I think if you look at the American public today and you read who goes where to what movies, and that might seem a little incongruous, but I think it'll become clear. One of the top movies today is We Were Soldiers. One of the top movies just recently, a short time ago, was Black Hawk Down, obviously the reruns of Saving Private Ryan. And I think it underscores the issue of that we leave no one behind. I think, unfortunately, yet due to past mistakes now viewed in 11 years of 20/20 hindsight, and that's easy to do, that is what we did with reference to a young man by the name of Michael Scott Spiker, who was the first pilot shot down in the Gulf War back in 1991. And in pursuing every avenue absolutely, and I underscore the word absolutely, to determine Captain Selectee now, Spiker's fate, that effort speaks volumes as to the difference between our values and that of those who certainly threat our way of life, as illustrated by Director Tenet, and I think it speaks volumes in regards to our relationship with Iraq. So after significant congressional prodding, Presidents Clinton and Bush, and now Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld and those before them, indicate that Captain Selectee Spiker, quote, might be alive. The Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has had an ongoing investigation into the intelligence community's performance with regard to the 11-year Spiker case, and they have, and I list them, spearheaded the effort that changed Navy Captain Scott Spiker's status from killed in action to missing in action. And we have pending now before the Defense Department a change from missing in action to prisoner of war. Passed legislation to establish and maintain an analytic capabilities supporting activities relating to prisoners of war and missing persons, and I thank Director Tenet for his efforts in that regard. We directed a DOD CIA Inspector General's review of the intelligence community efforts to determine the fate of Scott Spiker, and I thank Admiral Wilson for his perseverance in that regard. And we directed the first ever intelligence community assessment of the fate of Captain Spiker, which resulted in President Clinton saying just before he left office that he might be alive. In view of the numerous reports received since the September 2000 intelligence community assessment that indicated Scott Spiker probably survived the shoot-down, what is your assessment today of the probability that Captain Spiker is a prisoner of war? And I think that Director Tenet indicated that Admiral Wilson would respond to my question.
Senator, as you know, we continue to work and track down every possible lead regarding Commander or Captain Select Spiker. Our conclusion is that we don't know for sure what happened to him, but the Iraqis do know. And we certainly do not exclude the possibility that he could be alive and still be held captive. We simply do not know for sure, but continue to pursue with vigor to try to resolve this case.
Well, I thank you for that response, because it seems to me that too often that unquoted officials in the Pentagon indicate, well, you know, after 11 years, it really is not very probable that Scott Spiker may be alive. And the other comment is, what on earth is in Saddam's head that he would keep somebody prisoner for that long, more especially an American pilot? I point out he kept an Iranian pilot 17 years. And to try to determine what is in Saddam's head, I think is rather foolhardy. I will tell you what's in his head. It's a dark center of evil representing man's inhumanity against man, with self-preservation stuffed in there with all of that. And I think as you look at the background of the man, that he tries to emanate the example, according to the dissidents that I've talked to, of people like Stalin and Hitler. So I think to try to evaluate Commander, now Captain Selectee Spiker's fate on what is going on in Saddam's head is simply counterproductive. I thank you for your answer, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Senator, I'd like to also just comment on the POW MIA cell that you mentioned in your question. I asked the DCI to assign that responsibility to DIA. That cell has been up and running since summer and has done enormously good work in preparing for combat operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere, taking all the steps that we can to try to lay the framework so that something like the unresolved case of Commander Spiker doesn't happen again.
Well, I really appreciate that, because I have been saying that, A, we did leave somebody behind and mistakes were made. That's probably the nicest way I can put it. I'm not going to get into that. But I've also been saying that Team Spiker today, and that's how I refer to it, with State Department and DIA and DOD and all of the intelligence community are working together, and as I've indicated before, absolutely endeavoring to determine every avenue to pursue the fate of Commander Spiker, now Captain Selectee. And it speaks to today. It speaks to every serviceman and woman who wears the uniform. It speaks to every effort that we do, in fact, leave no person alive. And I thank you for your current efforts. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Roberts, and thank you for your persistence. It represents the highest values of this nation, and we're all indebted to you, and it reflects, I think, well upon the intelligence community for them to use every possible avenue that they have to determine the fate of Commander Spiker. Senator Carnahan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will submit my statement for the record. Director Tenet, in the New York Times recently, a security expert was quoted as saying, without intelligence information to narrow the search, trying to find nuclear weapons smuggled into the United States is worse than looking for a needle in a haystack. Dr. Steve Fetter from the University of Maryland said, you just hope you never get to the point where you have to track down one of these nuclear warheads in a city. How can the intelligence community improve its information sharing with law enforcement authorities in the case of such an event?
Well, Senator, I would tell you that the director of the FBI and I every morning evaluate all the threat information, all the intelligence that's passed to him in real time, to his joint terrorism task forces around the country. We have intelligence officers living with those terrorism task forces, and I'm satisfied that there isn't anything we generate overseas that Bob Mueller does not get, and that he's in the process of ensuring that state and local officials are also being brought into the process of understanding what we collect. So we're joined at the hip on terrorism, and in particular, obviously, the issue of protecting the homeland. Governor Ridge has provided us an enormous amount of help in that regard as well.
Well, I read a report recently that there was a credible threat of a nuclear device being smuggled into New York City. But Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Pataki were not informed until after the fact. Why were they not informed?
I would tell you that that was not a credible threat, and I'd like to discuss that in closed session. And the FBI and everybody working this was on top of this. And but we, in the particulars of whether they were or weren't, I don't know. But I will tell you this: that we run down everything, but we don't attempt to scare the American people when we don't think things are credible or things are brought to us by fabricators. And in this instance, that was the case. This was not a credible threat, otherwise reported by the media, but it was not a credible threat. And the individual who brought us the information was deemed to be not credible, and we believed that early on. And truthfully, I know the director of the FBI or Tom Ridge would never withhold credible information to any of our mayors or governors when they believe that we have to get them to help us act.
On another topic that we have touched on already, I was in Central Asia in January, and we met with the Turkish government then. I got the impression from them that in the event of an attack on Iraq, although Turkey has been our ally for years, that they would not want to be a part of that. What can we do to convince Turkey or others to be with us in such an event?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask that, but let me just say that if we ever get to that point, and I think nobody's made any decisions to do anything. It's really interesting that we're attacking Iraq in the next 24 hours. I'm not aware of anybody making those kinds of decisions. And I'm sure if the president ever reaches that kind of a decision, he and the Secretary of State and the chairman and others will build a coalition of people and make their case. But this is something that policymakers and the president will take on board when and if he ever makes that kind of a decision. And there are lots of different strains in the region, and governments have different views at this moment in time. And when the United States approaches them and says this is what we want to do or don't want to do, and you get into the game on game day, you find that everybody's attitude changes when you're talking to them about something that's specific and real. So
you don't feel like this necessarily would be a firm commitment on their part, that it could change over time?
Ma'am, my experience is that everybody changes their views depending on what you're putting on the table, and I'm not aware that anybody's put anything on the table.
One final question. The creation of a nuclear weapon is not a simple task, but a radiological dispersal device is much easier to make and deploy. To the best of your knowledge, how prepared are we to detect, deter, or respond to the use of a dirty bomb?
Ma'am, I'd like to take that in closed session if I could.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Carnahan. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up, the way the last question was asked, it said, implying that making a nuclear weapon is not an easy thing. We all understand that. But buying a nuclear weapon is a fairly easy thing. Can you draw any distinction in your mind as to a threat that could be posed to us by any rogue nation, whether they did it indigenously or whether they bought the weapon?
Actually, sir, I think buying a weapon may be more difficult. Acquiring fissile material is the issue that I think concerns us. And we know over the last decade there have been all kinds of anecdotal evidence of people attempting to sell fissile material. Any number of attempts to do that have been stopped. So the question in our mind is, where's the fissile material?
Yeah.
And then the question is, do you have expertise, design capability to put something together, whether crude or more sophisticated? So the real concern we have is material rather than the weapon itself.
But how easy is it to trace material?
It's a difficult proposition,
Yeah,
sir, but we should talk about all that.
Well, I understand that, but I just think it's needs to be said. Let me ask you something, Admiral Wilson. I know that you could say that there are terrorist threats everywhere, but in terms of on the level that has been concerning us, that we are dealing with on a daily basis, do you feel that there are potential terrorist threats to our forces in Puerto Rico?
I'm not aware of specific indications of that, but certainly our military believes that they are a target of terrorist groups wherever they can operate, and it certainly we could have a threat in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, well, that's a very straightforward answer. I know that we're all concerned about our troop protection all over the world, anywhere, including here in the United States. But I think sometimes people will use that in this particular environment as an excuse to do things or not do things they'd otherwise do. Let me ask you, Mr. Tenet, and I'm sorry I had to leave for a while. I was here at the very beginning, but so you may have answered this question. In your testimony on February the 6th, I think it was, of this year, you mentioned Iraq's ties with the al-Qaida and their common hatred for America. And you also stated in your prepared statement that Iraq has had contacts with al-Qaida. We know about the meeting in Prague between the Mohammed Atta and an Iraqi intelligence official. However, on the very moment that happened of the previous testimony, and the Baltimore Sun ran an article quoting unnamed U.S. intelligence forces as stating that the CIA has no evidence that Iraq has engaged in terrorism against the United States since Saddam Hussein tried to assassinate President George H.W. Bush in 1993. Can you clarify this for the record?
Sir, I'd like to do all of this in closed session.
All right. I'm sure you've talked about some of the interest in trying to have various reforms in our intelligence system. And we have the NSA and the CIA, and of course the defense has their systems too. And I remember that my predecessor, with whom you worked, in fact, for whom you first came to Washington, had a great interest in doing some major reforms, and you were involved in an early stage. I've made an observation, and I wouldn't say in an open session where this was, but I was very pleased to find that all of these groups are around the same table, exchanging information, and it's not the exclusive clubs that some thought it was at one time. Do you think we're making progress in our communication with each other through the various intelligence agencies?
Yes, sir, and I'd ask Admiral Wilson to comment, but I think you have a very integrated intelligence community that communicates every day at the leadership level and at the working level. We're working very hard on the relationships with law enforcement, which have improved rapidly over the last 5 years. It's not since a few months ago. Obviously, the ability to share and move information quickly has to be one of our major objectives, and we're succeeding in that regard.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Tenet, I witnessed it on the working level, and it was working very well. Admiral Wilson, any comments on that?
I think I should just comment give you an example of military intelligence echelon above CORE, which is all the unified commands, DIA, and the service intelligence centers. When you take a look at how we were organized, how we operated, what the doctrine and TTP, tactics, techniques, and procedures were, and what our problems were in 1991 in the Gulf War, and you compare that to the way we are organized, the way we operate today, and the way we've capitalized on an explosion of information technology to federate and collaborate, it is a completely different organization. And that's for military intelligence, and similar trends are true in the intelligence community at large.
That's good.
It's truly a completely different organization and much smaller.
Thank you, Admiral and Mr. Tenet. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sir. Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Tenet and Vice Admiral Wilson, I want to thank you for being here, and certainly to extend appreciation for the work you're doing to integrate the intelligence community to assist us against worldwide and domestic threats. Also to compliment you for the work that was done that prevented the loss of lives and property in Singapore with the arrest of 13 terrorists, most of which received apparently their training in camps in Afghanistan. So it's clear that we're working together to protect the world as well as our citizens here at home. The first question I'd like to explore is there are apparently interests in Iran right now working perhaps in western Afghanistan, in particular Herat and Mazar Sharif. Apparently there are scores of Iranian intelligence and military personnel which may have found their way deep inside Afghanistan, working groups and others that are designed to destabilize the interim government. Is there anything that you might be able to tell us in open session about the efforts to determine whether or not that's correct, and whether our efforts may be successful if there are these interests in rooting them out and trying to assist the interim government of Chairman Karzai to assist in that effort?
Sir, let me just say in my open statement I alluded to the fact that we're concerned about this and worried about what the clerical regime believes the United States may be up to, and certainly doesn't like the fact that we've become the dominant player on the ground there. And beyond that, I'd like to talk about it in closed session. It's an important subject.
Well, it is probably reasonable to assume that they have an interest, being neighbors, and I'm certainly not going to take their side of the issue. But it's reasonable to assume that they do have an interest, and that we're going to have to be rational in our relationship.
Well, sir, there's an interesting juxtaposition at the Bonn conference that created this interim government. On one level, the Iranians were helpful on a diplomatic level, and on another level, what we see in Afghanistan is quite a different experience in terms of where their interests may lie and how the problems they may pose for us, and it may indicate the dramatically two faces of this government that we're dealing with all the time.
We're used to dealing with schizoid behavior, I assume.
Well, I think it's worse than schizoid, sir, but I'm not a psychologist.
The second question is with respect to Iraq. I know there's a lot of question, and Senator Warner brought it up, that we may be faced with a decision to enter Iraq, and the decision may very well be made to enter Iraq. But I believe that members of this committee and members of the Congress hope that it won't be brought to us as a fait accompli. That once a decision is made, now it's brought to us. I think the advise and consent relationship that there exists between Congress and the administration. And keep in mind, I've had experience on the administration side in state government, so I'm mindful of the desire for the administration to work with Congress. But I hope that we'll be in a position where in closed session and appropriate discussions, input is achieved before a decision is made at the administrative level. I know that may not involve directly your position, but I hope that you can express that to the administration, certainly on my behalf and hopefully on behalf of my colleagues here in this committee.
I think it's safe to say that Senator Nelson speaks, if not for all of us, because that probably I can't say, but I do believe for just about everybody in the Senate that I've spoken to. And even though that isn't your decision as to that kind of consultation, probably it is important that you pass that along to the administration, because you're very much involved in that process. And I think the concern which Senator Warner and others have made here, have expressed here, is one that is shared by most, if not all, members of the Senate.
Yes, and I don't want to suggest that that won't happen, but there's always a concern that it might happen in that order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir.
We thank you, Senator. I certainly have done my best in this area with from the President on down and received those assurances. But equally important is bringing the American people along so they fully understand exactly what has to be done.
Thank you. Senator Bunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Tenet and Vice Admiral Wilson, thank you for being here. I'd like to take a little different approach on what Senator Warner and Senator Nelson talked about as far as Iraq is concerned. If in fact there is a direct connection, and it is a connection that we can actually prove, that Iraq was involved in the September the 11th bombing and, or whatever you want to call it, the Holocaust up in New York, and all the Pentagon and other things that were involved in direct planning and fulfilling those plans. I think that the President should probably consult with very few members up here, maybe the Chairman and Vice and Ranking Member of the Armed Services Committee. But I think there was a general resolution passed by the Senate to take all necessary action to retaliate against the al-Qaida. I think that was the resolution that was passed on the floor of the Senate. And I didn't see anybody getting very upset here in the United States of America when we went into Afghanistan. In fact, there was celebration that we were finally making and taking a retaliatory action against those who had acted so irrationally and hostilely, and the al-Qaida, not necessarily just them, but the Taliban, the illegitimate government of Afghanistan. We were extremely happy when we went in with coalition partners. So I would think if we are going to react to Iraq in any manner, sending them a signal that we're going to would just, in my opinion, as Secretary Rumsfeld usually says when he comes before us, we're not telegraphing what the heck we're going to do. So I agree to an extent with the good senator from Virginia, but I surely don't think that everybody in the Congress needs to be involved in the decision-making process. And I want you to take that message, that there are some of us that thinks that if you have the information you need to react, that you should go ahead and do it. Today in the Washington Post report that Sudan had captured a senior member of al-Qaida. I'd have a devil of a time pronouncing his name. Abu Anas Liby, L-I-B-Y?
Probably Libby.
Libby, who is a suspect in the East African embassy bombing. Have the Sudanese given us access to him or not?
Sir, I don't want to talk about this in open session. I'd like to do it in closed session.
You don't want to talk about it in open session?
No, sir.
All right. I'll wait till the closed session. Does the CIA have sufficient resources in place to protect the United States from another catastrophic attack as of like September the 11th?
Sir, I think that the CIA, the FBI, the INS, the board,
all the intelligence,
all of these, well, they're not intelligence agencies, but I think the budget that you have in front of you that the President has submitted is going to certainly put us all in a better place. The kind of homeland protective measures that Governor Ridge is implementing, I think our security is improving every day as we move from brute force to smart, random thinking about the things we have to do. I think the budget in front of you is going to put the country in a much better place.
Mr. Tenet, I questioned the Secretary of Defense and the head of the Joint Chiefs on our operation in Afghanistan, and it was hard for me to understand how so many al-Qaida and Taliban seemed to be able to escape when we were hunting down specifically leadership people in both the Taliban and the al-Qaida. And maybe you can help me out.
Well, sir, I wouldn't. Certainly a lot of people gone in and over this a very tough territory to operate in, sealing any of those borders.
You don't have to seal them.
No, sir.
But you can observe them.
Well, sir, we've worked pretty hard on it, but there's still many, many points of exit that people in small numbers can get out, and it's been something that we've worked on quite hard while we're fighting the war, chasing people, litigating military and intelligence targets, and it's certainly, we're frustrated that people did get away. We've worked very hard on this with all of the allies in the region to bring their forces to bear to help us not necessarily seal but watch those borders. We've picked up lots of people. So I think that it's an ongoing problem for us. We're still working it on the ground. We've got the Pakistanis, the Uzbeks, the Tajiks, and others still working at it. We'd like to seal that border with Iran to make sure people don't get in and out of Iran with any impunity. That
seems to be the major exit point.
Yes, sir.
Even though Pakistan is sitting where all the forces might want to run.
Yes, sir. So you need host governments to also support you in this, and that level of support has been particularly.
Iran is not cooperative.
We need a lot more help there, sir.
Just one about the schizophrenic people that we deal with. Iran is not only that way, but China is that way in many respects as far as cooperating in the war against terrorism, and yet on the other side creating the tools of terror with selling off things to those countries, those rogue countries, and those who are harboring terrorists. So we'll talk about that in closed session also. Thank you.
Sir.
Funny. Senator Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Director, and Admiral Wilson. Let me raise one question which might have been discussed indirectly before or directly, and that is the North Korea's indigenous missile development program. Estimates have the threat from Korea and even Iran by 2015, but there are lots of presumptions and assumptions that undergird that assessment. And could you comment upon this situation? And I might also note that my understanding is that in Iran, the last 4 tests of the Shaheed-3 missile have resulted in failures. The last occurred in January of this year. And what might that add to your estimates about the potential for a longer-range missile threat from North Korea and Iran?
Let me talk first, Senator, about the North Korea's indigenous missile program. They have relatively few exports of value, and they certainly have exported missile technology and missiles in sometimes imaginative marketing techniques and schemes, and used income produced by that to fund their own fielding some of those same missiles in their own country. We have seen the numbers of short-range ballistic missiles increase, and we have seen them progressively field longer-range missiles to where there's a greater threat to the theater and ultimately to potentially even an intercontinental way. So it's a very interesting problem in the sense it's the one country where export first actually is the fuel that allows indigenous development. And we are tracking it as a very top priority for all of intelligence and certainly for military intelligence. And I think that on the Iranian launches, we need, first of all, we have been in good position to monitor them, good collection capacity that the community can bring to bear. And it's very important that our scientific and technical analysis people, as they are doing, plunge very deeply into what occurred. If there were failures, were they significant or some minor, easily correctable deficiency? Constantly be taking in new information and applying those back into our assessments. And in this area of endeavor, I would say that quick judgments about success or failure are very dangerous. We need to analyze all this data over time to make the proper assessments about whether a program is proceeding faster than we believed, slower than we believed, or on pace.
Director, do you have comments?
No.
Let me just ask in conclusion, the 2015 estimate for that intercontinental capability, you still feel confident is the right estimate? Or?
Yes, sir.
And based upon all the evidence you've gathered?
Very high confidence in what we've just put out publicly in that regard in the estimate.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Senator Reid.
I would say, Senator, one thing that's the wild card in all of this, all the time in these estimates, is the pace of technology and the pace of foreign assistance continually surprise us. So this is a good piece of paper this year. And what that foreign assistance looks like and how technology evolves and how quickly people make their indigenous capability. The problem with estimates is you estimate sometimes you estimate when you don't know. And we've learned in the ballistic missile area that things happen a lot faster than estimates sometimes predict. So if you were going to worry about this, worry on this side of the equation in terms of how fast some of these things can come on and surprise us.
Just following up, if I may, the point the Admiral raised is that it appears that the North Korean program appears to be funded by its exports of similar technology. Are you consciously, or I should say not you, but are we consciously and deliberately trying to disrupt that trade?
We're paying a lot of attention to it, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Allard.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to yield to my colleague from Alabama. He stepped out briefly. It'd be possible for me to yield and then reclaim part of his time later on here when he steps out. He's got a schedule problem, if that's okay. But I'll just go ahead with my questioning and see if he shows up, if that's okay.
That'd be fine.
A couple of weeks ago, Mr. Robert Walpole, a National Intelligence Officer for Strategic and Nuclear Programs at the National Intelligence Council, testified before a Senate committee regarding the National Intelligence Estimates foreign missile threat. And during that hearing, Mr. Walpole made what I thought was a very important statement regarding the important and in fact it was an important and eye-opening statement, but it's somewhat lengthy, so please bear with me because I want to repeat it for the record. And his statement goes to this effect, open quotes: "All this leads us to assess that the probability that a missile with a weapon of mass destruction will be used against U.S. forces or interest is higher today than during most of the Cold War, and it will continue to grow as the capabilities of potential adversaries mature. More nations have ballistic missiles. They have already used missiles against the United States forces and Allied forces during the Gulf War. Although those missiles did not deliver weapons of mass destruction, Iraq has weaponized ballistic missile warheads with biological and chemical agents, and they were available for use." Goes on. "Moreover, some of the states armed with missiles have exhibited a willingness to use chemical weapons with other delivery means. In addition, some non-state entities are seeking chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear materials and would be willing to use them without missiles. In fact, we assess that the United States territory is more likely to be attacked with these materials from non-missile delivery means, most likely from terrorists, than by missiles, primarily because non-missile delivery means are less costly, easier to acquire, more reliable and accurate. They can also be used without attribution." But I think the third paragraph that I pulled out here is very important, and he says that, "Nevertheless, the missile threat will continue to grow, in part because missiles become important regional weapons in the arsenals of numerous countries. Moreover, missiles provide a level of prestige, chorus of diplomacy, and deterrence, and non-missile means do not. In short, intelligence community must work both threats. We do not have the luxury of choosing to work one at the exclusion of the other. Neither is a no likelihood situation. And my question, following that, close quotes, and my question is, both of you, do you agree with that statement? And second, well, go ahead and answer that question, then I'll follow up with another question.
Yes.
Sure. I do.
Okay, and then second, do you agree with Mr. Walpole that when he said we do not have the luxury of choosing to work one at the exclusion of other, thus isn't it a false choice, protection against non-missile delivery or missile delivery of a weapon of mass destruction?
From our perspective and our business, we don't have a choice. We have to work both those things. As intelligence professionals, we can't make that choice. We have to work both those hard and continue to provide you estimates in this regard.
Admiral Wilson?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. I just want to make sure the record reflects that both indicated that yes, they agree with both of those questions. And then, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read the balance of my time to the senator from Alabama, if I could pick up his time on when he questions.
I think you're going to be next anyway, so I'm not sure.
Want me to finish? Okay.
No, you can do it either whatever is convenient for you.
No, I'll go ahead and finish then, if that's okay. Your testimony indicates, this is to Admiral Wilson, that a number of nations and non-state entities are developing the means to disrupt, degrade, and defeat U.S. space systems. Since we are increasingly reliant on space-based capabilities, I find this personally disturbing. What states and non-state entities are pursuing these counter-space technologies?
The more advanced industrial states, obviously China and Russia, are the ones that have the most capabilities. With regard to non-state pursuit, I'd prefer to answer that in closed session.
Okay, and do we have evidence that our space hasn't been probed or attacked in the past?
I'd like to take that question for the record. I'm not aware of any significant examples, but I need to be sure. Okay. And what forms of attack could non-state entities pursue, and what is your estimate of the potential effectiveness of such attacks? Well, the type of attacks that can disrupt or degrade space systems include physical attack, for example, against important ground stations that we have to bring the information back to Earth, to electronic or information attacks against computer systems or networks or communication systems that make the entire space system work. And I think that on the low-end scale, attacking the ground side part of the infrastructure is obviously the larger threat than the stuff in orbit, for example. But those are the kind of things that would concern me most about a broader array of actors. I'd like to, Mr. Chairman, see my time's expired.
Thank you, Senator Allard. Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that all of us are watching the Afghanistan situation and all the ramifications of it with great interest. I visited Saturday with 7 of our soldiers who were wounded there. Just so impressive to be with them at Walter Reed, and there was just a sense of encouragement for me. But we do have other dangers in the world. Let me ask you about Colombia. I noticed, Director Tenet, you in your statement only had a paragraph on Colombia. Admiral Wilson, you made no mention of it, but it's a nation of 40 million people in this hemisphere. It's the second oldest democracy to the United States. We've got, you think about Kosovo, a nation, province of 2 million people, Colombia with 40 million, where we have real trading relations, a nation that represents a strategic part of that world that it would be a monumental tragedy if the democratic progress that's been made were to be eliminated as a result of an adverse outcome in Colombia. Let me ask you, first of all, Was it the directions or suggestions of the moment or the committee that you omitted that, or does that reflect Mr. Tenet, a relative lack of interest in Colombia?
No, sir. I have a detailed piece in the classified statement. In the unclassified form, we got a little paragraph in there.
I'm sure that's correct, and I didn't mean to be catty about it, but I do think we need to think about the importance of Colombia, and it's not being focused on correctly. President Pastrana recently ended negotiations with the FARC, has rejected this safe haven he had previously given them in an effort to engage in peace talks and encourage that. And let me ask you this, Director Tenet. Do you conclude that the narcotic terrorists, guerrillas, communists, kidnappers, dealers in narcotics, they've been indicted, I believe, in the paper was noted today for drug smuggling, that they used the time to that they were given to strengthen their position, or was it a good faith negotiation by the FARC with Colombia over the past several years?
Well, sir, I think that they attempted to solidify their position in this regard. I think what they're trying to do now is basically destroy the will of the Colombian people to resist. You've seen what they've done since in terms of economic infrastructure attacks, terrorism, plans to attempt to take this to urban areas. The Colombian people are quite tired of them. I think there's a new will that's emerging down there. Now, we are in the middle of an election. There will be a new president elected. There's a period that we're going to have to see what the new leadership thinks, who's elected, what they think about it. But this is a group that poses a fundamental narco-terrorist, certainly a good way to describe these people, but they pose a fundamental security challenge to the people of Colombia. And we still have a great outflow of cocaine from Colombia. The democracy itself is being challenged. This situation is, I would tell you, the administration is looking at quite carefully in terms of our evaluation of it. But this is, one paragraph here does not note the importance we attach to it from an intelligence perspective, level of effort down there in trying to understand all of this. So you put your finger on something that's quite important, sir.
I thank you for that, and I certainly believe we need to focus more on it. You know, the military in Colombia is not where it needs to be. The people seem to be coming together, though, in a way, and the military seems to be improving. The police, it seems to be improving. Is there something we can do to encourage them to be more effective in this effort against the communist guerrillas? And it would seem to me along that line that we ought to make clear that that's our policy. And I see some changes from the previous administration only recently that indicated our previous policy being focused solely on narcotics. Absolutely crystal clear, nothing else but narcotics was the basis for our involvement there. Is there a change in our policy, and how would you articulate our policy today with regard to Colombia and the guerrilla war they're facing?
Well, sir, I can tell you that the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense have this on the plate right now, actively looking at this issue, thinking their way through the problem. It's got everybody's attention as to those policy changes. It'll come out of the administration whenever they conclude what their next steps are, but you just need to know that this is something that's actively, the whole issue of Colombia is being thought of very carefully.
Well, I know there are many things on their plate, but I wrote Secretary of State Powell on this issue not long after he took office, encouraging him to reevaluate this policy, and I believe it should be done. It's overdue. Admiral Wilson, one of the things we've indicated that we would do to help Colombia is share intelligence. How will that help them in this effort, and how is that going?
I made a trip to Colombia last year and met with my counterpart there, the head of the police intelligence and all of the military chiefs. And we visited Tres Esquinas, the jungle base, for example, where counter-narcotics and counterinsurgency operations are ongoing. They clearly understand that they need better tactical and human intelligence on the foe, the FARC, that they face. And we are working with our embassy and with military and CIA to provide the kind of intelligence that we can that helps them, and to develop within their own forces the tactical intelligence skills that are necessary. And it's really the continuum from a national level view down to the tactical level that needs to be successfully worked by Colombia. And I think it's at that tactical level where they really have to help themselves, and where we have lessons learned and recommendations that can be helpful to them. We are engaged through the embassy and through the Southern Command on these issues.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I don't see any solution to this at this point other than Colombia being successful militarily. Perhaps at that point they can negotiate some way, but until they really get these people on the run or either totally defeat them, that country is going to be weakened, incapable of stopping narcotics. We can't expect a country that doesn't control its territory to be able to stop narcotics. And so hopefully we can figure a way to support them in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sessions. The open session will now conclude. It's been
Mr.
very...
Chairman, may I make sure that my opening statement gets put into the record, please?
Absolutely. It will be made part of the record as well, all opening statements. This has been a very helpful session. I think it is important that we begin in open session. But it's also important we now have an opportunity to go directly to executive session in room 219. We will stand.
Chairman, could I commend our witnesses? They have a difficult assignment coming up before the Congress in open session and balancing that information which at this point in time can be shared in the public domain. But I hope those following the hearing understand the seriousness of the nature of your work, and that we have to operate in classified section in order to balance the responsibility of the executive branch, which you proudly represent, and we, the congressional branch of government. Thank you.
Well, they do have a heavy responsibility, and they both carry it out very well. We thank you for that, and we will move to room 219.
And you've been watching a hearing by the Senate Armed Services Committee on worldwide threats to U.S. national security. The committee now going into closed session to hear more from CIA Director